I'm standing at my mother's grave, and there's a woman next to me wearing the same bracelet, the one my mother gave me on my 16th birthday, the one she said was one of a kind. White roses in her hands, my mother's favorite. Tears streaming down her face, like she has every right to grieve. I can smell the fresh earth, feel the cold metal of the bracelet against my wrist. She turns to me, her voice breaks when she speaks. That's my mother. My heart stops, because either she's insane, or I am, or worse, we're both telling the truth. Catherine Whitmore died on a Monday morning in March, 71 years old. Stroke. Quick. Painless, the doctors said. Her daughter, Julia, found her in her armchair, book open in her lap, reading glasses still on. She'd been alone for 15 years since Julia's father died. Julia had moved to Seattle for work, visited when she could, called every Sunday. It was a small funeral. Catherine had outlived most of her friends. A few neighbors came, Julia's husband, David, their 2 kids. The service was simple, traditional. Julia gave a eulogy about a devoted mother, a strong woman, someone who'd sacrificed everything for her family. And then, as people were filing out of the cemetery, she saw her, a woman, maybe 40, standing apart from the group, sobbing quietly. Dark hair, her mother's eyes, wearing a navy dress and holding white roses. Julia didn't recognize her. She walked over, assuming she was a distant relative or old friend of her mother's. "Thank you for coming," she said gently. "How did you know Catherine?" The woman looked at her like she'd been slapped. How did I know her? Her voice was sharp, broken. She was my mother. Julia froze. "I'm sorry, what?" Catherine Whitmore, born 1952 in Boston, married Richard Whitmore in 1975, had me in 1984. The woman's voice was shaking. "She's my mother." Julia felt something cold creep up her spine. "No, Catherine was my mother. I'm her daughter, Julia." The woman stared at her. "She never mentioned a Julia." "She never mentioned you." Silence. The kind that feels like the world tilting. "I'm Emma," the woman finally said. "Emma Whitmore, and I'm her daughter."
They didn't talk at the cemetery. Too many people. Too surreal. Julia's husband pulled her away, whispering that the woman was clearly disturbed. But Emma called her the next day. The funeral home had given her Julia's number. "We need to talk," she said. "Not aggressive, just desperate. Please, I know this sounds insane, but I'm not crazy. I need to understand what's happening." They met at a coffee shop, neutral ground. Emma brought a box, photographs, documents, a lifetime of proof. She laid it out methodically on the table. Birth certificate, Emma Rose Whitmore, born April 3, 1984. Mother, Catherine Whitmore. Photographs of a little girl with Catherine. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, first day of school. Report cards signed by Catherine. Mother-daughter notes passed back and forth. A framed photo of Emma's college graduation, Catherine standing next to her, beaming.
"This is from 2006, Emma said, pointing.
My mom came to Boston for the ceremony. We had dinner after. She told me how proud she was. Julia felt dizzy. That's impossible. My mother lived in Portland her entire adult life. She never went to Boston after 1975. She lived in Boston. Emma's voice was firm. Certain. 42 Maple Street. We lived there together until I went to college. Julia pulled out her phone, showed Emma her own photographs. Catherine holding her as a baby. Different house, different city. Catherine at her high school graduation, 2001. Julia in her cap and gown. The same woman, same face, same smile. Two completely different lives. Emma's hands were shaking. How is this possible? Julia didn't have an answer. They compared details, birth years. Julia was born in 1983, Emma in 1984. Fathers' names, both Richard Whitmore. But when Julia showed Emma a photo of her father, she shook her head. That's not my dad. She pulled out her own photo. A different man. Same name. My parents divorced when I was 8, Emma said. Dad moved to California. Mom raised me alone. My parents stayed married until my dad died in 2008, Julia countered. Different histories. Same mother. One of us is wrong, Emma whispered. Julia looked at the evidence spread across the table. Or both of us are right, and that's worse. Julia hired a private investigator. Someone discreet. Someone who could dig without judgment. The investigator's name was Patricia Torres, former detective, specialized in cold cases and identity fraud. Julia and Emma met with her together, laid out everything. Patricia listened quietly, taking notes, studying the photographs. This is unusual, she said carefully, but not impossible. Let me look into Catherine's history, see what I can find. 3 weeks later, Patricia called them both in. Her office was covered in documents, timelines, maps, photocopies of records. I need to ask you both something, Patricia said, and I need you to answer honestly. She looked at Emma. Did your mother ever have periods where she seemed different, distant, like she wasn't quite herself? Emma frowned. Sometimes she'd have these episodes. She'd get quiet, withdrawn, lock herself in her room for days. How often? Once or twice a year. She called them her bad spells, said it was just depression. I thought it was normal. Patricia turned to Julia. What about you? Julia thought back. Yeah. She'd have these phases where she'd barely talk. Dad would make excuses, say she was tired, stressed. She'd disappear sometimes too, Julia added slowly, the memories surfacing. For a few days. Dad said she was visiting an old friend. I never thought much of it. Patricia nodded. Here's what I found. She spread out documents, medical records, psychiatric evaluations. In 1983, Catherine Whitmore was hospitalized for a severe psychotic break. She'd just given birth to Julia. She was diagnosed with postpartum psychosis. Julia's blood ran cold. She was treated for 6 months, released, seemed stable. But in 1984, she had another break, more severe. Patricia pulled out a hospital record. She was admitted to a psychiatric facility in Boston. She was pregnant,
8 months. Emma's face went white. That's when I was born. Yes, Patricia's voice was gentle. You were born in that facility, Emma. But here's where it gets complicated. She laid out more documents. After you were born, Catherine's psychosis intensified. She became convinced she had 2 separate lives, 2 families, 2 identities. Her doctors documented it extensively. She believed she was living in Portland with her husband and daughter, and simultaneously in Boston with her husband and daughter. Julia felt sick. So one of the lives was a delusion. Patricia looked at her, then at Emma. That's the problem. I can't tell which one. Patricia explained further. Catherine's delusion was incredibly detailed. She created entire histories for both lives, kept them separate in her mind. When she was in Portland, she was Julia's mother, fully. She remembered her birth, her childhood, every moment. When she was in Boston, she was Emma's mother. Same completeness, same conviction. Her psychiatrists called it dissociative identity disorder with delusional features. That trauma or brain chemistry, or both, fractured her sense of self. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. So, I'm not real? My entire childhood was her delusion? That's just it, Patricia said. I have documentation of you. Birth certificate, school records, social security number. You exist, Emma. You're real. She turned to Julia. And so are you. I have your records too. So how? Because she made it real. Patricia's voice was careful. After she was released from the Boston facility, she started living a double life, actually physically living it. She'd spend weeks in Portland with Julia and Richard. Then she'd leave, tell them she was visiting a friend, and she'd go to Boston. In Boston, she'd rent an apartment, enroll Emma in school, live as a single mother. Then she'd leave Emma with a babysitter, tell the babysitter she was going on a work trip, and she'd go back to Portland. Julia couldn't breathe. For how long? Years, from 1984 until at least the mid-1990s, maybe longer. Patricia pulled out financial records. She maintained 2 separate bank accounts, 2 sets of bills, 2 complete lives. She'd switch between them, sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly, but she never mixed them, never let the worlds collide. Emma was crying. So, my childhood, the memories I have of her, those were real? Yes, but they were only part-time. The babysitters you remember, the aunts who watched you, they were filling in when Catherine was in Portland. Julia felt like she was drowning. What about my childhood? Was that real? Also, yes, but she was disappearing on you too. Those visits to friends, she was with Emma. Silence. Both of them trying to recalibrate their entire understanding of their mother, their childhoods, their reality. Emma looked at Patricia. What about my father, Richard Whitmore, the man who divorced my mom when I was 8? Patricia's expression became even more careful. Emma, I need you to prepare yourself for this. I can't find any record of him. No marriage certificate between Catherine and a Richard Whitmore in Boston, no divorce records, no California address. But I remember him, Emma said, her voice breaking. I have memories. He took me to the park. He taught me to ride a bike. I believe you have those memories, Patricia said gently, but I think Catherine created him as part of the Boston life narrative. She looked at Julia. Your father, Richard Whitmore in Portland, he's real. I have all his records. Marriage certificate, death certificate, employment history. But Emma's father, Patricia shook her head. I think he was either completely fabricated or he was a brief relationship Catherine turned into a full marriage in her mind. Emma's face had gone completely white. So, my father never existed? There may have been a man, Patricia said carefully. Someone Catherine dated briefly, someone who spent a little time with you. But the father you remember, the marriage, the divorce, him moving to California, I think that was part of Catherine's delusion. She needed the Boston life to mirror the Portland life, and in Portland she had a husband, so in Boston she created one. Julia reached across the table, took Emma's hand. When did it stop? Julia finally asked. When did she stop going to Boston? Patricia hesitated. I think it never fully stopped, but it changed. She pulled out more recent documents. In the late 1990s, your father in Portland, the real Richard, he found out about the Boston apartment, the separate bank account. There was a confrontation. He threatened to have her committed. She stopped going to Boston after that. Physically stopped. But Patricia looked at Emma. When did your mother move to Portland? Emma's voice was barely audible. 2009. She said she wanted a fresh start after my dad died. Julia's father, the real Richard, died in 2008, Patricia said quietly. The implication hung in the air. She told you your father died, Julia said slowly, looking at Emma. So she could explain why she was moving, why she was leaving Boston. But really, Emma whispered, she was coming back to you full time because your father, the real one, had died. The truth was fracturing, splintering into a reality far more complex and painful than either of them had imagined. Emma remembered something. There was a woman, Helen. She watched me a lot when I was little. She was like a second mother. Patricia's eyes lit up. Do you have contact information? I can find her. 2 weeks later, they were sitting across from Helen Brennan, 74 years old now, living in a nursing home in Boston. She remembered everything. Oh, Catherine, Helen said, her voice soft with old sadness. I tried to help her. I really did. How did you know her? Julia asked. We met at a support group for mothers with postpartum issues. She was struggling badly. Helen looked at Emma. She showed up one day with you. You were maybe 6 months old. She asked if I could watch you for a few days, said she needed a break. I said yes, but a few days turned into a week, then 2 weeks. Then she'd come back for a few days, then leave again. It became a pattern. She'd be there for stretches, sometimes weeks, being a wonderful mother, attentive, loving. Then she'd get this look in her eyes, distant, panicked, and she'd say she had to go, had to get back. Back where? Patricia asked. She never said, but I knew. I could tell. Helen's voice dropped. She had another family, another life. Did you confront her? Once. She looked at me like I was crazy, insisted I was confused, that she'd never mentioned another family. But the next time she came back, she thanked me, said, Helen, you're the only one who understands, the only one who knows. Emma's voice was small. Helen, do you remember my father, Richard? Helen's expression became very careful, very sad. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "there was no Richard, not that I ever met. Catherine talked about him sometimes, told me stories about their marriage, their divorce. But when I asked to meet him, when I suggested he could pick you up sometimes to give her a break, she'd get flustered, make excuses. I realized eventually," Helen continued, her voice soft, "that he probably didn't exist, not the way she described him." "But I remember him," Emma whispered. "I have memories. He was tall. He had a beard. He called me little bird." Helen reached across and took Emma's hand. "There may have been a man, honey, someone Catherine dated briefly, someone who was kind to you for a little while. But the father you remember, the one who lived with you, who was married to your mother, who moved to California, I think Catherine created that story, told it so many times, so convincingly, that even you believed it." Emma was crying now. "So I never had a father." "You had Catherine," Helen said firmly, "and you had me, and the babysitters, the neighbors. You were loved, Emma, even if the story around that love wasn't true."
Julia spoke up quietly. "My father was real, Richard Whitmore. He raised me. He was there." "I know," Helen said, looking at her with compassion. "Catherine talked about him too, about her other daughter, her other life. That one was real, documented, solid. This life," she gestured around, meaning Boston, meaning Emma, "was built on something more fragile, part reality, part delusion, part desperate need." Patricia leaned forward. "Helen, did Catherine ever talk about which life was real, which one she believed in?" Helen was quiet for a long time. "I don't think she knew. I think she believed both were real, equally, completely. She'd talk about Julia sometimes, with the same love, the same detail as she talked about Emma. She wasn't pretending, she wasn't lying. In her mind, you were both her daughters, both real, both loved. She was just living in two realities, and in one of them she had to invent a husband to make the story complete. But the love for you, Emma," Helen squeezed her hand, "that was never invented. That was always real."
Julia and Emma sat in Julia's car after leaving the nursing home. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Emma said, "I don't know what's real anymore." Julia looked at her. "Does it matter?" "Of course it matters. My entire childhood might be a delusion, a psychotic episode I was trapped in." "Or mine was," Julia countered. "Maybe I'm the delusion. Maybe she created me to cope with losing a daughter. Maybe I never existed the way I think I did." They sat with that. "Patricia said we're both real," Emma finally said. "Birth certificates, records, we both exist. But what if our memories of her aren't real? What if the mother I remember isn't the mother you remember? What if we're remembering two different women?" "Maybe we are," Julia said quietly. "Maybe that's the point." She turned to face her. "My mother loved me, raised me, was there for me, most of the time. The absences, the disappearances, I just thought that was normal."
"Same," Emma whispered. "I thought all mothers needed breaks, needed space." "So maybe the question isn't which life was real. Maybe the question is, did she love us?" Emma's eyes filled with tears. Helen said she did. Both of us. And I believe her, Julia said, because I felt it. Even with the absences, even with the strangeness, I always felt loved. Me too. They sat in silence again. I think she was sick, Emma said eventually. I think her brain broke, and instead of destroying her, it split her into two people who could each handle half of a life. And we were both real, Julia added, because she made us real. She lived both lives so completely that they both existed. Do you think she knew at the end? Did she know she had two daughters? Julia thought about her mother's last years, the confusion, the moments where she'd call her by a name she didn't recognize. I think the dementia broke down the walls. I think at the end, both lives were bleeding together, and she couldn't tell which was which anymore. Maybe that's why she seemed so confused. She was trying to hold on to two realities that were colliding. Julia reached over, took Emma's hand. I have a sister, she said. Emma looked at her, tears streaming. I have a sister. Our mother was sick, but she was also ours, both of ours. Yeah, she was. They met again a week later, at Catherine's grave. Both of them brought white roses. I went through her things, Julia said, found something you should see. She pulled out a box. Inside, 2 identical silver bracelets. She told me she gave me this on my 16th birthday, Emma said, touching the one on her wrist. She told me the same thing, Julia said, but there's 2 of them. She bought 2, one for each of us. Inside each bracelet, engraved, all my love, always, Mom. She knew, Emma whispered. On some level, she knew we both existed. Julia nodded, and she loved us both enough to give us the same gift, the same promise. They stood at the grave in silence. What do we do now? Emma asked. We remember her, Julia said. Both versions, the Portland mom and the Boston mom, the one who made pancakes on Sundays and the one who took you to museums. We pieced together who she really was, and maybe we'll never know completely, but we can try. Emma smiled through tears. She'd like that. Both versions of her would. Yeah, Julia agreed. They would. 6 months later, Julia and Emma had dinner together. Once a month now. A ritual. Getting to know each other, building something their mother never could. A relationship that existed in one reality, solid, unified. I've been seeing a therapist, Emma said, trying to process everything. Same, Julia admitted. What does yours say? Emma stirred her coffee. She says our mother probably had a condition called dissociative identity disorder, maybe combined with something else. That trauma or brain chemistry or both fractured her sense of self. Instead of having one cohesive identity, she had 2, and instead of fighting it, she just lived it, literally. Julia nodded. My therapist said something similar, that she wasn't lying. She genuinely experienced both lives as real. The scary part, Emma said quietly, is that I understand it now. I feel like different people in different contexts. The version of me at work versus with friends versus alone. We all do that, though, Julia said. We all shift depending on who we're with.
Yeah, but we know it's the same person underneath. Mom didn't.
She believed she was two separate people, living two separate lives. They sat with that. "Do you think she was happy?" Emma asked. Julia considered. I think she was as happy as she could be, given her condition. She gave herself permission to be multiple people, to not choose, to not compromise. And it cost her, Emma added. She could never be whole, never be fully present in either life. But she also got to love both of us, Julia said. Fully, completely. Just separately. Emma smiled sadly. I think that's what Helen meant when she said Mom believed both lives were real, because love was real in both. The love didn't fracture. The identity did, but the love stayed whole. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence. Finally, Julia said, I don't think we'll ever know which life was the real one, or if both were, or if neither was. Maybe that's okay, Emma offered. Maybe the point isn't solving the mystery. It's accepting that some people exist in ways we can't fully understand, and loving them anyway. Yeah, Julia agreed, loving them anyway. A year after Catherine's death, Julia and Emma created a memorial. Not a gravestone, something different. A photo album, combining both lives, Portland and Boston, Julia and Emma, all of it together. Pictures of Catherine with Julia as a baby, pictures of Catherine with Emma at her first day of school. Side by side, no hierarchy, no real versus delusion. Just a woman who lived two lives and loved two daughters. They titled it, The Complete Life of Catherine Whitmore. Because it was complete, all of it, every fractured piece. So, here's the lesson. People are not always what they seem. Sometimes they're more. Sometimes they're fragmented. Sometimes they're living in realities we can't access. The question isn't whether those realities are real. The question is whether the love within them is real. And in Catherine's case, it was, completely, undeniably. She loved two daughters in two separate lives, and both of those daughters felt that love. Both of them carry it still. Was she sick? Yes. Was she a good mother? Also, yes. Both things can be true. Julia and Emma learned that the hard way, that truth isn't singular, reality isn't fixed, that the people we love contain multitudes, and sometimes those multitudes split into separate lives, separate identities, separate truths. And we can either reject that complexity or we can embrace it. They chose to embrace it, to say, our mother was two people, and we love both of them. Our childhoods were fractured, but they were also filled with love. We'll never fully understand her, but we don't have to. We just have to remember her. Truth is not always singular, and love can exist in fractured realities.